All right, members of the jury, and I suppose to our audience as well, the next witness, I'm told, is Dr. Lindstrom, who is a medical examiner and performed the pathological examinations on Mr. Debreu and Mr. Furtado. And as I've told you before, sometimes graphic evidence is presented, and I expect through the next witness may be presented in photograph form. It may be at times difficult to view. Please understand that while it's understandable that one may have emotional reactions to that evidence, you cannot allow those emotions to in any way influence your judgments. You must remain dispassionate and objective at all times. And as to members of the audience, to the extent any member of the audience might find it difficult to hear this testimony, I'd ask you to please do your best to refrain from any outward demonstration of emotion. And if you find that difficult, perhaps it's appropriate to step out of the courtroom for this witness's testimony. All right, Mr. Hagan. Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Commonwealth calls Katherine Lindstrom.
You solemnly swear that testimony you shall give this court and jury, the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar, shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so be God? Thank you.
Step have a seat, right? Mr. Lee.
Thank you. If you wouldn't mind, could you just please introduce yourself to the members of the jury and spell your first and your last name, please?
I'm Dr. Katherine Lindstrom. It's Katherine. Last name is Lindstro.
And, Dr. Lindstrom, can you tell us by whom you're employed?
The Commonwealth of Massachusetts at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner.
And how long have you been with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
A little over 5.5 years.
And can you tell us a little bit about your responsibilities there?
So as a medical examiner, we perform autopsies and external examinations on people who die sudden, unexpected, or unnatural deaths in order to determine cause and manner of death.
And what were you doing prior to coming to the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
I was completing my forensic pathology fellowship at the University of New Mexico.
Could you tell us what forensic pathology is?
So basically, forensic pathology is learning to do autopsies in order to determine cause and manner of death.
Can you tell us a little bit about your formal education, beginning with your undergraduate work?
So for undergraduate, I got a degree in chemistry at the University of Iowa, followed by a medical degree also at the University of Iowa. I then did a general pathology residency at the University of Virginia in anatomic and clinical pathology. That was followed by a 2-year neuropathology fellowship, also at the University of Virginia, and then I did my forensic pathology fellowship.
Do you hold any board certifications?
Yes.
And can you explain to the members of the jury what it means to be board certified in your field?
So basically it means I've completed the necessary training and met all the criteria, including passing a board certification exam in order to be board certified by the American Board of Pathology.
Do you hold any other certifications other than the one in forensic pathology?
I'm board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, neuropathology, and forensic pathology.
Now you mentioned before, Dr. Lindstrom, that you conduct autopsies as part of your work with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Can you tell us a little bit more in detail what an autopsy consists of?
So an autopsy is basically a head-to-toe examination of the outside of the body, followed by an examination of the inside of the body and the organs. We document any injuries, natural disease, or any other findings that we might see.
I'd like to direct your attention to July 17th of 2012. Did there come a time on that date when you were asked to perform an autopsy on an individual who was identified to you as Daniel De Abreu?
Yes,
And with respect to Mr. De Abreu, did you conduct an initial external examination of his body?
I did.
Is it part of your examination to first conduct a measurement of the height as well as a measurement of the weight?
Our autopsy assistants or medical examiner assistants perform that, yes.
And what was the height and weight of Mr. De Abreu?
I believe he was roughly 5'7" and 189 pounds.
With respect to Mr. De Abreu, did you notice at any time apparent gunshot wounds from your external examination?
I did.
And how many gunshot wounds were you able to identify based upon your external examination of Mr. De Abreu?
He had 2 entrance gunshot wounds and 2 exit gunshot wounds.
Now, on that same day, did you also have the occasion to conduct an autopsy on an individual later identified to you as Furtado?
Yes, I did.
And with respect to Mr. Furtado, did you also conduct an external examination of his body,
I did.
including a height and weight measurement?
Yes.
And what was the height and weight measurement of Mr. Furtado?
I believe he was also roughly 5'7" and 188 pounds.
Did you note any apparent gunshot wounds from your external examination of Mr. Furtado?
Yes.
Okay. And what gunshot wounds did you note?
He had 2 entrance gunshot wounds on his head. He also had 1 exit gunshot wound on his head. And then he had an entrance gunshot wound on his right arm and an exit gunshot wound on his right upper back.
Now, in addition to examining both individuals for the presence of gunshot wounds, both exit and entrance wounds, did you also, with respect to both individuals, attempt to determine the path of any projectiles that may have gone through their bodies?
I roughly attempt to determine that from the external exam. In some cases, I can't determine that solely from the external exam, so I then follow it with the internal examination.
And can you tell us a little bit about what the internal examination consists of?
So I examine the body cavities, including the chest and abdominal cavities, and then the organs that are within, and then I also examine the head.
Now, is that the time when you would note any internal injuries?
Correct.
All right. And with respect to both individuals, did you also attempt to determine a general directionality or trajectory of any projectiles that may have entered their bodies and or in the appropriate circumstance exited their bodies?
Yes.
In addition to doing all those things, do you also document the autopsy in some way?
Yes.
In what way do you do that?
I generally take photographs as well as make gross notes on a body diagram or other paper that I might use.
And in this particular instance, with respect to Mr. De Abreu and Mr. Furtado, did you photograph their respective autopsies?
Yes.
You may. Let me see you at sidebar for one moment.
I'd ask you to take a look at those 7 photographs that I handed to you, Dr. Lindstrom, and once you've had a chance to take a look at them, can you just let us know?
All right.
And do you recognize those 7 photographs?
Yes.
And are those photographs, by and large, photographs of the entrance and identified as part of your external examination of Mr. De Abreu?
Yes.
And did you take those photographs yourself?
There were some that were taken by me and some taken by the state police. I'm not sure which these are.
Nonetheless, are they fair and
Or
accurate
possibles.
representations of the entrance and exit wounds that you saw as a part of your autopsy of Mr. De Abreu?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd offer those as the next numbered exhibits, or we can do it by letter.
All right, I think what would make sense is to mark these Exhibit 370 A through G, all relating to Mr. De Abreu. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Lindstrom, in addition to photographing the individual entrance and exit wounds with respect to Mr. De Abreu, did you also assist someone from the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office in generating a computer image of an individual showing the relative trajectories of the injuries that Mr. De Abreu suffered?
Yes.
And what was your role in the participation of creating that image?
I basically assisted her in making sure that the trajectories and entrance and exit wounds were in the correct location.
Approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Do you recognize the 2 photographs or 2 diagrams that I've handed to you?
Yes.
And are those 2 diagrams showing the trajectories of the bullet wounds that you identified with respect to Mr. De Abreu?
Yes.
And are those images that you've seen prior to coming to court today?
They are.
And are they the images that you participated in creating with input about what you personally observed as part of your autopsy?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd offer those as the next 2 exhibits.
No objection. Let's mark then 371A and B.
Approach the witness again, Your Honor.
I'm sorry?
May I approach again?
Yes, sir.
Showing you that thumb drive, Dr. Lindstrom, do you recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. And you recognize that, what do you recognize that as?
It was shown to me earlier today, and it contains the computer files for the trajectory and diagrams that you just presented.
And does it also contain the photographs that we just admitted namely 370A through G, as part of the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. And that thumb drive also contains similar trajectory diagrams and photographs with respect to your autopsy of Mr. Furtado, is that correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, at this time I'd offer that as the next, well, for identification as a chalk demonstrative aid.
Is that 4Bs? 4Bs.
Dr. Lindstrom, are we looking at what has been received as 371A in evidence?
I believe so.
Oh,
I don't know the
are you-
exact number.
Okay, I'm sorry. But that's the chart that you assisted in preparing, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, did you label the wounds that you observed on Mr. De Abreu by letter designation?
I did, yes.
And can you explain for the members of the jury how it is that you labeled the wounds that you saw in Mr. De Abreu's body?
Generally, I letter them from right to left, top to bottom, roughly. And I do that if they're close together and I need help distinguishing them from each other.
At some point, did there come a time when you labeled one of the injuries that you saw as injury B?
Yes.
And what is injury B?
That's an entrance gunshot wound on his right anterior chest.
And did that wound have a corresponding exit wound that you observed?
Yes.
What did you label the exit wound?
C.
And in 371A, are wounds B and C denoted with the same color blue?
Yes.
And exit and entrance are distinguished by a circle for entrance and a square for exit?
Correct.
Okay. Can you describe for us what it is that you saw about this injury and including the path as part of your internal examination?
So this gunshot wound entered on the right side of his chest. It went through the anterior, or the front of the right second rib near where it meets the sternum or breastbone, then entered into the chest cavity, went through the upper lobe, or the upper part of the left lung, and then exited out through the left upper back, through the left posterior second rib.
Did you look for any sooting or stippling as a part of your examination?
Yes, there was none.
And could you explain for the members of the jury what sooting and stippling is and what significance the presence of sooting and stippling may have?
So if the gun is in contact with the skin or very close to the skin, soot might get deposited on the skin when the gun is fired. If it's slightly further away, you might get stippling, which occurs when gunpowder particles are embedded into the skin and they make a pattern, a stippled pattern, which is why it's called stippling.
And you noticed no sooting or stippling in this particular wound, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the entrance wound and the exit wound? Was there anything significant about their shape and size?
So see the exit wound. So typically an entrance wound is a round punched out hole, and an exit wound is more of a laceration or tear in the skin where you can put the sides of it back together. In this case, C was what we call a shored exit, in that it resembled more of an entrance wound type pattern because it had more of a punched out hole appearance to it. And that's important to note just so that you don't confuse it with an entrance wound. And basically, when an exit is shored, it just means that the skin was up against something tight, or like if he was pressed against the seat or the ground, or even if he had tight clothing on that supported or shored up the skin and pulled it tight so that when the bullet exited, it created more of a punched out hole rather than a typical exit.
And what about with respect to the entrance wound B? Was there anything remarkable about entrance wound B?
It was a typical entrance wound.
And clicking on entrance wound B, on the left is sort of a further version, and the inset is one taken with a ruler. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And as you said before, it's a typical entrance wound, roundish in nature.
Correct.
And with respect to exit wound C, can you show the members of the jury what you meant by the presence of shoring?
Just that, as you can see here, it's more of a punched out hole rather than a tear in the skin. So that's.
And is that in the area that I've highlighted with the...
So that's a sort of an abrasion that's to the side of it, and that's again something that's more typical of an entrance wound than an exit wound.
But that is an exit wound,
This is
correct?
an exit wound. It's a short exit wound.
Now, in addition to the wounds B and C, did you note another entrance wound with respect to Mr. Deabreu's body?
Yes.
And what label did you give the second entrance wound?
That was labeled as A.
And did you see a corresponding exit wound for wound A?
Yes.
And what label did you give that, if any?
D.
Can you tell us a little bit about where A and D were located? And again, if you could take us through if there was anything remarkable in your examination of those two wounds.
So A was located on the lateral chest, so just underneath his right armpit. That gunshot wound then went through the right lateral or side of the right fourth rib. It went through the right lung. Then it went also through the superior vena cava, which is a vessel carrying blood to the heart. It went through the esophagus, which is what you swallow food through. Then it went through the aorta, which is a large blood vessel carrying blood away from the heart. Then went into the left side of the chest and through the left lung. And then it exited through the left lateral third rib, and then exited through the left upper, posterior left upper arm.
Was there anything that you noticed specifically about the entrance wound A and the exit wound D that was of note?
The entrance wound A had a ring of sort of dark discoloration around it that I attributed to bullet wipe, which is basically there was some dirt or debris on the bullet that made a dark ring when it passed through the skin.
And the presence of bullet wipe can suggest under certain circumstances that the area where it's deposited may have been the first object struck by the bullet. Is that correct?
Possibly not necessarily.
Okay. Did it have any significance in your examination of wound A?
Other than I noted it, no.
Anything remarkable about your examination of exit wound D?
No.
Showing you exit wound D. That is in the left upper arm of Mr. Deabreu. Is that correct?
This is the entrance wound.
I'm sorry. The glare here I can barely see. I apologize. That is the entrance wound. I'm sorry. Can you? And that's underneath his right armpit. Is that correct?
Correct.
Generally speaking.
Yes.
And exit wound D is in his upper left arm. Is that correct?
Correct. Now,
this is the 3D image computer generated that you assisted with in graphically showing the trajectory. Is that correct?
Yes.
In addition to the injuries that you described seeing internally, did you also note anything else internally with respect to Mr. De Abreu?
So he had a large amount of blood within both of his chest cavities. So he had approximately 1 liter of blood in his right chest cavity surrounding his right lung, and then 1 liter of blood in his left chest cavity surrounding his left lung.
And the presence of blood in the left and right chest cavity is indicative of what?
It's blood loss due to his injuries, and it would have compressed his lungs, making it difficult for him to breathe.
As part of your autopsy of Mr. De Abreu, did you recover any items in connection with your examination?
I did recover 2 small fragments of bullet.
And with respect to those 2 small fragments, did you do anything with them?
I packaged them and sealed them within an envelope and retained them as evidence.
And ultimately, did you make arrangements for those 2 items, for those 2 pieces of fragment to be forwarded elsewhere?
I believe the police came and picked them up from our office.
Showing you what's been previously admitted as exhibit number 216. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And specifically, do you recognize the envelope in which you placed the 2 fragments that you recovered from Mr. De Abreu's body?
I do.
And does the envelope bear some identifying information as it relates to the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
Yes,
And does it also contain your name?
it does.
Those 2 fragments, as you see them there, are they in the same or similarly same condition as when you recovered them from Mr. De Abreu's body?
They appear to be, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd ask that exhibit number 216, which had previously been admitted, be admitted for all purposes.
Without objection, it is now fully received.
Dr. Lindstrom, given the type of injuries that you observed in Mr. De Abreu and your experience in conducting autopsies, particularly with respect to gunshot wounds, were you able to form an opinion as to how long Mr. De Abreu could survive after having been shot in the 2 places that you observed?
He could have survived from seconds to maybe a couple of minutes.
And can you help explain to the jury what the mechanism of death would have been with respect to Mr. De Abreu? That is, physiologically, what would he have been going through before he died?
So he had severe blood loss, as well as he had, again, the blood within his chest cavities, which would have compressed his lungs, making it difficult for him to breathe. Eventually he would have lost consciousness, and then his heart would have stopped beating ultimately.
During the time he would have been conscious, would he have been able to experience or to feel pain?
Grounds? Yes.
Doctor, just in the event that I think there was an objection lodged, but during the time that Mr. De Abreu was conscious, would he have had the ability to have pain sensations or sensations of pain?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that there was blood, liter of blood in each chest cavity, that is left and right, for Mr. DeAbreu. Did you notice blood anywhere else in that area?
Within the body? Oh, he had aspirated or breathed in blood, so there was blood within his lungs. So he did take a few breaths after he was injured.
And when you say aspirated, what does that mean?
Breathed in.
Breathed in blood.
Yes.
And that's indicative of finding blood in his lungs?
Yes, within the lungs.
Now, on the same day, did you have the opportunity, or were you asked to perform an autopsy with respect to Mr. Furtado?
Yes.
Okay. And forgive me if I asked you before, but did you do a height and weight measurement with respect to Mr. Furtado?
Yes.
And what was that? What was the result of those measurements?
I believe he was approximately 5'7" and 188 pounds.
With respect to your internal, external, and subsequent internal examination of Mr. Furtado, did you note a number of gunshot wounds on his body?
Yes.
And how many gunshot wounds did you note in total?
So he had 3 gunshot wounds, 2 paired entrance and exits, and then 1 entrance with a bullet lodged within the head.
Let's discuss them individually, and starting with, did you first observe and then subsequently note a gunshot wound to the right temple of Mr. Furtado?
Yes.
Based upon your examination of his body, did that gunshot wound have a corresponding exit wound?
No, it did not.
Could you describe for the members of the jury the nature of the entrance wound to Mr. Furtado's right temple?
So he had a typical entrance wound near the end of his right eyebrow. That bullet then went through the right frontal bone, which is the bone making up the front of the head, the right frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that's towards the front, and through the right orbit, the base of the right orbit, which makes up the eye socket. That bullet then went through the base of the skull, through the bones making up the bottom of the skull, below the brain, and then a bullet was lodged on the left side of the head near the brainstem and left temporal lobe. There were also multiple bullet fragments within the head.
Did you note any fractures to the skull as a result of seeing this gunshot wound?
Yes, he had numerous fractures to his skull.
With respect to this particular entrance wound on the right temple, did you note any sooting or stippling?
No.
And what was the trajectory that you determined that this particular bullet wound took?
It went from the right side of his head to the left side of his head, from the front to the back, and then it didn't deviate significantly up or down. It was pretty much straight across.
And you said you recovered some material as a result of your examination of this wound. Is that correct?
Yes.
Showing you what has been marked previously as exhibit number 214. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that item to be?
It's the bullet that I recovered from Mr. Furtado's head.
Okay. And is that bullet in the same or substantially the same condition as when you took it out of Mr. Furtado's head?
It appears to be, yes.
Is it packaged with the envelope in which you put it?
Yes.
And did you make the same arrangements for that item to be maintained until picked up by the Boston Police Department?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd ask that what has previously been marked as exhibit number 214, de bene, be received in full.
Without objection, that is now fully in exhibit 214.
In addition to the gunshot wound to the right side of Mr. Furtado's temple, did you note any other gunshot wounds?
Yes.
And you said there was another corresponding exit and entry wound to his head?
Correct.
And located?
The entrance wound was on the right side further back above his ear, and then the exit wound was on the left side back of his head.
And did you note a third gunshot entrance wound with a corresponding exit wound?
Yes.
And where was that located?
On his right, the entrance was on his right arm or shoulder, and then the exit was on his right upper back.
Dr. Lindstrom, showing you those 7 photographs, do you recognize those?
I do.
And do those photographs fairly and accurately show the gunshot wounds that you described? That is an entrance wound to Mr. Furtado's right temple, an entrance wound to the back of his right head with a corresponding exit wound on the left side of his head, as well as a gunshot wound with the entrance in his upper right arm and the exit to his back. Are those fair and accurate representations of those wounds?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd offer those as the next numbered exhibit with letter of designation.
All right, without objection, subject to some redaction, these will be received. Let's see,
372 A through G, I think.
thank you.
Dr. Lindstrom, similar to what you did with respect to your autopsy of Mr. De Abreu, did you also work with someone from the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office in generating a computer image of a body showing the trajectories that the bullets took with respect to Mr. Furtado's body?
Yes.
Showing you those 2 diagrams, do you recognize those?
I do.
And what do you recognize them to be?
They are the diagrams showing the entrance and exit wounds and then the trajectories.
And those are those are 2 images of the trajectories, both showing the with trajectory rods in the second one and with letter designations in the first one.
There aren't letter designations on the first one, just colors.
Colors, okay, and those are the ones that you assisted with?
Yes.
Your Honor, just comment off of this is the next number of exhibits.
Counsel, without objection, is that 2 in number?
Yes.
373A and B.
Dr. Lindstrom, this is the first wound that you described with no corresponding exit wound, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And was there anything notable about the entrance wound in the injury to Mr. Furtado's right temple?
It was a typical entrance wound.
You mentioned the second wound to the right portion of the right side of Mr. Furtado's head.
Yes.
And does that gunshot wound to the right part of Mr. Furtado's head above his ear have any notable characteristics to it?
It has an area of abrasion towards the front or the anterior portion of the wound, which gives some idea as to the bullet's trajectory, that it was going from front to back.
And while you're at it, can you also give us the remaining directionality of that bullet?
So it went from the right side of his head to the left side of his head and then downwards as well. It went through the right parietal and temporal lobes of the brain and the occipital lobes of the brain, which are in the back of the head. Also struck the cerebellum, which is also located in the back of the head. And then it exited through the left side of his head in the back.
And what part of the brain is the cerebellum?
It's located in the back of the head, behind the brainstem, helps coordinate movement.
Is that the exit wound for the wound that you just described?
Correct, on the left side of the
Now on
back
the
of his
left
head.
side. Was there anything remarkable about that particular wound?
It's a typical exit wound. It's sort of stellate or star-shaped.
Now, as a result of your examination of Mr. Furtado's head, did you recover any items from inside his head?
There were numerous small bullet fragments within his head that could have come from either of the gunshot wounds.
Showing you exhibit number 215, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
These are the bullet fragments that I recovered from the head, as well as the envelope that I sealed them in.
All right, and did you do the same thing with those fragments as you did with the projectile and the other two fragments? That is, did you put them in an envelope, seal them, and then make arrangements for them to be picked up?
Yes.
And those fragments, as you look at them, are they in the same or substantially the same condition as when you removed them from Mr. Furtado's head?
They appear to be, yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd ask that what has previously been marked as exhibit number 215, Dave Bene, be received in full.
No objection.
All right, 215 is now fully an exhibit in this matter.
Dr. Lindstrom, you mentioned a third injury with an entrance wound to the right arm. And do you see that displayed on the screen at this time?
Yes.
Most significantly by the yellow circle on the left.
Yes.
And is it fair to say that that's to the back or towards the back of the upper right arm?
Yes, the right upper arm or shoulder.
And that had a corresponding exit wound on Mr. Furtado's, or the right side of Mr. Furtado's back, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And that's shown by the circle on the left in this photograph?
Yes.
Can you describe the path of this particular bullet and also include the trajectory as well as what kinds of damage, if any, you observed as a result of this wound?
So this bullet entered through, again, the right upper shoulder or right upper arm, and then it went under the skin and the soft tissue through the shoulder and upper back, and then exited through the right upper back. It would have caused bleeding or injury to the soft tissues there. It didn't hit any bones or cause any fractures. It went from his right side to his left side and slightly from front to back.
Now, with respect to this particular wound, did you attempt to use a trajectory rod to determine the trajectory inside of Mr. Furtado's body that the bullet took?
Yes, and I'll just to demonstrate that the two wounds were connected to each other.
Okay. And in so doing, can you tell us a little bit about how you go about using the trajectory rod when you're trying to make this determination?
So basically you are threading a rod through the tissue. You have to be careful not to force it or apply too much pressure because you could create your own hole or defect in the tissue. So you have to do it very gently and very carefully, and sometimes you have to move the arm, or in this case the arm or shoulder, around in order to get the rod through.
But when you find the path, you sort of find the path. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes.
All right. And when you, in this particular case, were you able to find, using the rod as a guide, a discernible path from the entrance to the exit?
Yes.
And is that depicted by this photograph in the upper right corner with the yellow circle around what you determined to be the exit wound on his upper right back?
Yes, that metal rod is the trajectory rod that I placed.
Now, with respect to any of the injuries on Mr. Furtado's body, that is both of the entrance wounds to his head as well as the entrance wound to the upper right portion of his right arm, did you note any sooting or stippling?
No.
With respect to the injuries that you saw on Mr. Furtado, do you have an opinion, or did you form an opinion about how long Mr. Furtado could survive after being struck by either of the shots to his head?
It would have been a very short time, seconds, maybe not even that.
And in conducting your autopsy, based upon your examination of the wounds, are you able to determine the sequence of the shots?
No.
The wound to Mr. Furtado's upper right arm and back would have not in and of itself been fatal. Is that a fair assessment?
Not quickly. No.
Potentially fatal, or?
If someone could have potentially in the long term gotten an infection that could kill them, but no, not immediately or anywhere near immediately fatal.
As part of your autopsy of both Mr. Furtado and Mr. De Abreu, are you required under the law to fill out what's known as a death certificate for each individual?
Yes.
Showing you those two documents, do you recognize those?
Yes.
And referring you to the top document, what do you recognize that to be?
It's the death certificate for Mr. De Abreu.
And does that death certificate bear Mr. De Abreu's name as well as his date of birth?
Yes.
And does that document also bear your signature?
It does.
And are you required under the law to fill out a death certificate in connection with Mr. De Abreu's death under these circumstances?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd offer that as the next numbered exhibit.
No objection.
Let's receive that subject to any appropriate redaction.
I think they are agreed upon, Your Honor.
$374.
Do you recognize the second document?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That's the death certificate for Mr. Furtado.
And does that bear Mr. Furtado's name as well as his date of birth?
It does.
And does it also bear your signature? Do you recognize your signature on that document?
Yes.
And that is also a document that you must fill out as a medical examiner under the law, under these circumstances. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd offer that as the next exhibit.
No objection.
All right. Received subject to redaction.
375. 375.
You see the full name on the top line next to the number 1. Do you see that, Doctor?
Yes.
And the date of birth for
Yes.
Mr. DeAbreu? And showing you exhibit number 375, the same with Mr. Furtado. Dr. Lindstrom, based upon your examination and autopsy of Daniel DeAbreu, did you form an opinion to a medical degree of certainty the cause of death of Mr. DeAbreu?
Yes.
And what was that?
Gunshot wounds of the chest.
And based upon your autopsy and examination of Mr. Safira Furtado, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause of death with respect to Mr. Furtado?
I did.
And what was that opinion?
Gunshot wounds of the head and right shoulder.
Thank you, Dr. Lindstrom. I have no further questions.
All right. Folks, let's take 5 minutes.